$1,000 customer can save on the
inside the government worker bee level. They want to know
support from Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans, suburban women, and younger voters.
The Secretary of State has visited the Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
And they wouldn't go into court with what Rudy Giuliani goes into court. And the other night, you read out parts of the judge's decisions in these various cases. And they were just throwing out the cases. They were throwing out the lawyers. That's how bad it was. And the only thing...
Apply for authorization tomorrow. As the military says, once approved, it can distribute a vaccine nationwide within 24 hours. And AstraZeneca says its vaccine looks especially promising for the elderly. Hospitalizations up more than 100%. This hospital in Nevada using a parking garage as overflow space for patients, as more than 1 in 5 hospitals don't have enough nurses and doctors. School closing chaos. Protests over the return to remote learning in the nation's largest school district.
Education is a right and dining is not at all.
The terrible toll tonight on low-income families. As President Trump loses more of his legal challenges, the strong words tonight from President-elect Joe Biden.
He will go down in history as being one of the most irresponsible presidents.
Plus, the man once known as America's mayor peddles election conspiracies in a bizarre news conference. Breaking his silence, Prince William speaks for the first time about his late mother's bombshell interview 25 years ago. And music may be the best medicine. Tonight, the remarkable way one patient is saluting frontline workers from his hospital bed.
This is the CD.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on a Thursday night, and we begin tonight with that new warning from the CDC, and it's blunt. They are now urging Americans not to travel this Thanksgiving. With the nation having lost more than 250,000 American lives to this, and given what they've seen in just the last 24 hours, nearly 200,000 new cases, the numbers are simply accelerating too fast, and they fear that Thanksgiving will only make this worse if we all don't pitch in. We took note of this map from the New York Times showing the nation's hotspots today, the deepest red there, but you can see this virus is all across the country. And after passing that 250,000 mark, the CDC now projects that we could see 298,000 lives lost by mid-December. Governors across the country saying this is dire, pleading for the public's help. Louisiana's governor tonight saying his state is in the third surge of this pandemic. Ohio's governor reporting hospitalizations are now at a critical state, the highest so far in this pandemic. New Hampshire imposing a statewide mask mandate. And California tonight with a new overnight curfew for much of that state. There's also news coming in tonight on a third vaccine showing promise as well. And Dr. Fauci in the White House briefing room for the first time in months late today. ABC's Whit Johnson leading us off here in New York.
Tonight, the CDC is recommending against travel this Thanksgiving, as it now forecasts another 46,000 Americans could die by December 12th, a staggering potential toll of 300,000 people. A vaccine can't come soon enough. The White House Coronavirus Task Force briefing for the first time since July. Dr. Anthony Fauci touting the effectiveness of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and reassuring Americans they will be safe.
So we need to put to rest any concept that this was rushed in an inappropriate way. This is really solid.
The general in charge of distribution for Operation Warp Speed promising the vaccines, if approved, will be on the move immediately.
I can look you in the face and say to you, EUA comes, 24 hours later, vaccines will be distributed out to the American people and be ready for administration.
Hospitalizations are now climbing in all 50 states, nearly 80,000 patients, a new record. ICUs hit hard in South Dakota, where new cases have surged by 400% in the last 2 months, but still no statewide mask mandate.
A lot of us are just tired of seeing the negative comments from the community, the lack of understanding of quite how serious this illness is.
And tonight, about 100 of the country's biggest hospital groups out with a new ad, begging the public to do their part and wear a mask. Healthcare workers grinding through exhaustion 8 months into the pandemic.
we know every day we come into work, it's going to be one of the worst days we've had.
Ohio reaching critical hospitalization levels. California ordering a curfew in hard-hit counties between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Outside Oklahoma City, 13-year-old Devin Embry went from the football field to the ICU, now fighting for his life on oxygen.
Devin was one of the ones who did not want to go back to school because he was so scared of it. He wanted to play football and he couldn't do it if he stayed at home.
In Utah, retired music teacher Grover Wilhelmsen playing his beloved violin while on a breathing machine, lifting the spirits of hospital staff before becoming too ill and requiring sedation.
That's just a remarkable scene, and which joins us now with Pfizer, the first
Increase in cancellations. So far, that's been outpaced by the number of new bookings. That could be a sign that many Americans plan to go ahead and travel for Thanksgiving anyway. Nora?
Chris Van Cleve, thank you. COVID hospitalizations nationwide are up more than 100% in the last month. Rural hospitals in particular are at a tipping point. Nearly 20% of Americans rely on them. And tonight, CBS's Carter Evans takes us inside a hospital in Rupert, Idaho that's bracing for an onslaught of COVID patients.
COVID is now ravaging rural America. Today, we got a first-hand look inside a small Idaho hospital, Minidoka Memorial, with just 17 beds and a staff overwhelmed.
Super exhausting. You leave here tired. You might even start your shift out tired.
This hospital doesn't have an ICU, but there are 3 beds now for COVID patients. This 85-year-old man is infected and struggling to speak.
He's pretty weak, and that's one of the common symptoms for a lot of people.
Large cities initially bore the brunt of the pandemic, and while COVID cases are increasing again, nowhere are they rising faster than rural areas. In Idaho, 1 out of every 4 COVID tests come back positive, but many here still refuse to wear masks.
Everything you do is based on the mask and the disease, and it's wrong.
When you see people not protecting themselves, what do you think?
We probably will see them someday.
The impact is being felt nationwide.
It's relentless. It's day after day. It really takes a toll.
A hospital in Topeka, Kansas, so overrun with COVID patients that some are being kept in hallways and waiting rooms until an ICU bed becomes available. The Mayo Clinic is now reporting more than 900 staff members infected with COVID just in the past 2 weeks. In Reno, Nevada, these beds are in a hospital parking garage. By tonight, as many as 40 COVID patients will be housed here. The toll is grim. 10 members of this Ohio family are infected with COVID. Deanna Gibson just buried her husband, Ben.
He beat all these health battles, and then COVID killed him.
Back in Idaho, the fear is that the worst is about to hit.
Is there a possibility that all your beds could fill up?
So I do see that's going to happen, yes. I do see it will fill up fast.
Now, when they get a critical patient here, they already have to transfer them to other hospitals in the state. So what happens when those hospitals are full? Well, at that point, doctors will have to decide who gets a bed. And the chief medical officer at Idaho's biggest hospital tells me that could happen within 2 weeks. Nora?
Carter Evans, thank you. Today, President Trump was handed 2 more legal defeats, this time in Pennsylvania and Arizona, in his last-ditch effort to challenge the election in court. Well, now the president is shifting tactics as he attempts to cast doubt on the results. CBS's Paula Reed reports tonight from the White House.
With courtroom losses piling up, President Trump is trying a new approach in his fight to overturn the election: personal political pressure. He's called Republican legislators from Michigan to the White House tomorrow to persuade them to intervene after Wayne County Republicans failed to block Joe Biden's win earlier this week.
Joe Biden won the state of Michigan by over 150,000 votes.
Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer said the president needs to realize the election is over.
Stop spending energy to mislead about what happened in this election.
The Trump campaign had tried to block the Michigan election.
Is really available to most Americans.
Well, these numbers are absolutely mind-numbing. And if we don't want to be talking about 300,000, 350,000, 400,000, it takes individual action of wearing masks, keeping apart, and washing our hands. But it takes a lot more than that. Congress has to step up. They stepped up back in the spring, but if they step up again now and help get us through this winter to the time when we truly have enough vaccine to vaccinate Americans, we could see this turn around. You know,
Vice President not taking any questions. Reporters asking, where is the president?
Vice President, Mr. Vice President.
The president-elect growing increasingly concerned for the welfare of the American people. Biden today meeting virtually with a group of bipartisan governors.
My transition team hasn't been able to get access to information we need to be able to deal with everything from testing and guidance to the all-important issue of vaccine distributions and vaccination.
We asked him about the consequences.
How many lives do you think are at risk here if this transition remains stalled?
There's no excuse not to share the data and let us begin to plan. Because on day one, it's going to take us time. If we don't have access to all this data, it's going to put us behind the 8 ball by a matter of a month or more. And that's lives. How many would be lost as a consequence of that? I can't tell you.
Almost all of the president's legal challenges have been dismissed. Hitting dead ends, Trump and his campaign are now looking to friendly state lawmakers and election officials to try to overturn the results in key states. States Biden won by tens of thousands of votes.
What do you think the president is doing? What are Americans witnessing here?
Let me choose my words here. I think they're witnessing incredible irresponsibility, incredibly damaging messages being sent to the rest of the world about how democracy functions. And I think it is well, I don't know his motive, but I just think it's totally irresponsible.
And he had strong words for the president's actions, questioning if they're even legal.
He will go down in history as being one of the most irresponsible presidents in American history. It's just out of the, not even within the norm at all. There's questions whether it's even legal.
Mary Bruce asking the questions there late today. Let's get to Mary in Wilmington tonight. And I know there was news today about Michigan as well, with
having to come up with new colors to show how bad this is. This is the time for people to double down, take this seriously, change behavior, make sure that they're doing all they can personally, and then hopefully Congress will do the right thing and give the support so that this pandemic doesn't continue like it is currently.
Dr. Besser, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your really important advice as well. We are grateful to you. Just ahead, we'll have more on the fall.
Than what you choose to plant. Introducing Extend
on them, but the fact is that the people who are certifying the votes in the counties are going to do this audit and recount, and if the votes come out in favor of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump and there's no fraud proven in court, then any pressure on any kind of public official isn't really going to matter. But speaking of public officials and on Capitol Hill, it's interesting to look too. You had a number of conservative Republican congressmen today also calling for federal hearings on absentee ballots, mass vote, mail-in voting. So even, John, if we get through these lawsuits and the Trump campaign is or is not victorious in a number of them, I don't think this issue of how Americans vote now, given a lot of these policies will probably stay, will be going away anytime soon, and there will be questions about how things were handled for quite some time.
Hey, John, real quick, because we just got a few seconds left in this segment. How long are you hearing that this will go on?
I think Trump's in for the long haul on this. I think he's in as far as he can go, as far as he can possibly stretch out, and they're raising a lot of money through small donations, so I don't think they're fiscally constrained.
All right. We will take a break, and we'll be back with the latest on the coronavirus surge. Stay with us here tonight on Special Report.
For 2 years on the program, and it was such fun to go back and watch. And Larry's so right about the humor. It is the great leveler. It really is, and it tells us, and in important times and sometimes very serious moments, you know, try to find a little bit of the humor in it. And guys like Larry, they do that. They kind of reflect that instinctively. And it's good. No, seriously, man. I mean, and it's good, you know. And certainly being, you know, the only black correspondent on that program, that's an important first step for the rest of us brothers out here who are looking for role models. So you play a double role here.
God, Michael, I hope to have a puppet of me someday, is all I can say at this moment.
Well, that's the last question. We're looking at it now when he was with Jon Stewart. Larry?
Yeah.
MSNBC viewers have come to know the many Michael Steeles. Do you like better the original RNC chairman, the new Michael Steele who said that because of Trump's leadership and record, he was breaking with his party to endorse Joe Biden, or the third choice, the original Muppet Michael Steele?
I'm always going to prefer the Muppet because the Muppet has a type of facial hair that humans just can't achieve, and it's fantastic. It's this fuzz that it's coming at you, but it's kind of spreading out at the same time. See what I mean? It's just a beautiful type of thing.
Hold on, fact check. Are you talking about the fuzz, the blue fuzz, or the actual mustache?
Yes. No, the mustache and the hair on top, all of it. I mean, you can't duplicate that. It's fantastic. No, you can't. Michael's been trying to duplicate that, but he has not been successful as far as I'm concerned. I don't care whether he's trying to hide the Republican Party or trying to act like he's a woke one too. Whatever, Michael. You're never gonna outdo your Muppet. Sorry,
Larry, I'm running out of time, but there is a lyric. There is a lyric that applies to this.
Uh-oh. What can it be?
From Young M.A. We in the streets like sesame.
There you go.
There you go. And the day's number is 3.
I thought Michael, the number of the day was 270, and only one side has it.
Well, look, I can only have to say about 270. The only way Donald Trump gets to 270 is if he loses 50 pounds. So we can just let that go and move on.
All right. We'll end with the heat. Michael Steele, Larry Wilmore. Larry, I hope you come back. The show is Wilmore on Peacock.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. That was fun.
It's good stuff, man.
Absolutely. And we will be right back. We have an update on COVID, what President-elect Biden is saying, and something important about the pandemic. Stay with us.
Western Minnesota, but otherwise we're looking to stay sunny during the day tomorrow, even though we will be just a few.
Make more of what you.
Thanks, it's Varian.
Thank you so much.
Boost you to make being human better. So why are we here?
The viable candidate 4 years' time, and he could.
For the patients and those who heal. Chip Reed, CBS News, Washington.
And we are so grateful to all of our nurses and healthcare workers. We'll be right back.
This portion of the CBS Evening News.
Unprecedented pace of patients is higher than it's ever been.
It's a reality this part of Texas has only seen in its nightmares. The ICU at Odessa Regional Medical Center in Odessa, Texas, is at its capacity with COVID-19 patients.
Do you have an IS?
I didn't like the way that I looked in the mirror.
Excellent. If your financial situation has changed...
Good. So your bid has the...
Decor. Michael's. Made by you.
Capacity, while patients here literally are fighting for their lives.
We lost about 10 patients last week, and one of them had been on ventilator for about a month. The ones that are here now, on average, they've been on a vent for about a week or so.
Denise Morning
We're getting closer, okay?
is an acute care nurse practitioner.
There was only a few times in the summer where we were really pushed to the extreme, but now for the last few weeks, we're busting out of the seams.
But she and everyone else remain at war with the virus, even as some patients begin to take a turn for the worse.
When you first have to make that declaration, what is the first thing that goes through your mind?
Please, not another one. You know, it's a prayer. It's inevitable and we know what's going to happen, but the probability of it being a good outcome is very, very low.
But most are able to fight it off.
Look at you!
And turn the corner. Ruben Romero is feeling better after 2 weeks in the hospital and says This isn't a game. I asked why.
Me dijiste que este no es un juego. ¿Por qué?
Porque esto es una cosa muy seria.
Because this is really serious, he says. This virus is not for people to be playing with. It's very dangerous. It attacks your entire body. I'm living it, he says. And it's become life for so many in this part of the state. Hospital officials in Odessa say anywhere from 35 to 40% of the people getting tested are testing positive for COVID-19. They fear becoming what El Paso has become, mobile morgues for the dead, hundreds in the ICU amid record hospitalizations, and roughly 1 in every 24 people actively with COVID-19. It's required a regional coordination like never before.
In a relatively short period of time, our hospitals have added over 600 beds.
Wow.
You give your time.
The husband who looked up and saw exactly what he'd been waiting for. Dave and Janine Ketchadorian from Bethpage, New York, started feeling coronavirus symptoms within days of one another. They both had the virus, and 2 of their children had it too. Janine and the children slowly getting better, but David struggled. He was admitted to the hospital and fought the virus for 8 weeks without seeing his family. 8 weeks in, his wife, with antibodies, was allowed in to see him. In protective gear, her husband at first didn't realize it was his wife. And then he does.
No way. That's your wife? How are you? Look at that.
He waited 8 weeks.
And he just walked like a champ. That's the best.
And their hug.
That's the best medicine you can get.
How did you do this?
They did it for me. They did it. Dr. Wexler did it for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they said, remember this morning we said it was going to be a good day?
And 1 week later, when he came home from the hospital, it was this. The whole neighborhood at a safe distance welcoming Dave home. And right here tonight, Dave and Janine and their children back home together. Sending us a big thumbs up. We're so glad Dave is home, the whole family together for Thanksgiving. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with Dave.
It would end like this.
Across the globe.
You don't want to miss.
Why wait?
Take advantage of all kinds of Black Friday specials today during Carl's Why Wait sale going on right now. This LG stainless steel refrigerator will be priced at $9.99.
Why wait?
And 55-inch 4K TVs are starting at just $349.
Why wait?
Take advantage of all kinds of Black Friday specials today during Carl's Why Wait sale going on right now. This is one sale you don't want to miss. Take it from Elmer.
Why wait? Carl's used to seen needless since 1956.
Looking for the best information on home building, remodeling, interior design?
With kindness. Valerie McFarland Walker of Connecticut was 61. She was a certified nursing assistant who loved her job caring for the elderly. Her daughter, LaShonda, says her faith kept her going, along with her family, including 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and a newborn great-granddaughter. May they rest in peace, and may their memories be a blessing. Aaron Burnett on Front starts right now.
According
Tonight, President-elect Joe Biden blasting President Trump for challenging the election. As President Trump escalates his efforts to overturn his defeat, Biden calling him one of the most irresponsible presidents in American history. And the dueling messages on the pandemic. The White House task force holding its first briefing since July, but the president not taking part. And what Biden said about potential legal action of his own to force the president's hand. The new CDC warning Americans urged not to travel for Thanksgiving as COVID surges and hospitalizations hit a new record. Dr. Fauci speaking out on concerns the vaccine is being rushed. At a third promising candidate, what makes Oxford's vaccine different from Pfizer's and Moderna's? Plus, in some rollout, how will it work? Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's unprecedented visit in the West Bank, what makes his trip so controversial? The new dashcam video, a deputy opening fire at a car, 2 black teens inside, killed. The family saying authorities made a deadly mistake. Deep cleaning surfaces, does it stop the spread of COVID-19? What the science now says. And Hollywood at home, is it the future of movies?
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. President-elect Joe Biden tonight using some of his harshest language yet about President Trump and his flailing and baseless efforts to overturn the results of the election. Biden calling Donald Trump one of the most irresponsible presidents in history as critical sharing of information about the coronavirus pandemic is held up. The president still refusing to concede the election or allow the transition process to occur. The Biden team tonight weighing legal options. Kristen Welker has late details.
Tonight, President-elect Joe Biden blasting President Trump for refusing to concede and for what he says is the message he's sending to the American people.
I think they're witnessing incredible irresponsibility.
The president's decision not to assist the Biden transition, depriving Biden of critical briefings on national security and COVID. Tonight, Biden leaving open the possibility he may take legal action against the Trump administration, although leaning against it.
My judgment is that we'll get further along by actually working with our Republican colleagues now. It's an open question. It could change.
So you haven't ruled it out? You haven't ruled out legal action against the Trump administration, against the GSA?
We haven't ruled it out.
NBC News learning from 4 people familiar with the discussions. While Biden is growing impatient, his team is also worried if a court rules against them, the move could backfire. It comes with both Biden and the Trump administration hosting dueling press conferences on the pandemic, including the first White House task force briefing since July. Dr. Fauci touting progress on vaccines.
So we need to put to rest any concept that this was rushed in an inappropriate way. This is really solid.
Vice President Pence delivering this message from the president.
Our task force, this administration, and our president does not support another national lockdown. And we do not support closing schools.
Biden meeting today with a group of governors, with some already announcing new lockdown restrictions, including closing in-person schools.
No national shutdown, because every region, every area, every community can be different.
Meanwhile, the Trump legal team pressing ahead with challenges to the election. Rudy Giuliani today alleging an unproven conspiracy of voter fraud in big cities, despite secretaries of state saying there was no widespread fraud, and the Homeland Security Department declaring it the most secure election ever. Giuliani today declining to provide reporters any evidence to back up his allegations.
So the answer is no. The answer is I can't do it because I can't put a witness's life in jeopardy.
Meanwhile, this tonight from former President Obama to MSNBC.
These are just bald assertions. They've been repeatedly rejected by the courts.
President Trump has invited to the White House top Republican state lawmakers from Michigan as his campaign tries to overturn the results in that state where Biden leads by more than 150,000 votes. Lester.
Kristen Welker tonight, thank you. And from the CDC this evening, an urgent plea for Americans to stay home this Thanksgiving as COVID infections overwhelm the healthcare system and test our instincts and our resolve at this perilous moment. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
With the U.S. facing a crushing wave of patients and a growing number of fatalities, tonight at this critical phase, the CDC is now urging all Americans to stay home for Thanksgiving. The unprecedented plea comes as 50 million plan to travel for the holiday.
Why was it so important for the CDC to make this announcement today?
We have been watching the cases throughout the pandemic and watching the hospitalizations and deaths and seeing the dramatic increase over the last week. We really thought it was imperative to make this stronger statement today.
Tens of millions of Americans are going to disregard the advisory and travel anyway. What's your message to them?
To please still wear a mask. We know that it helps protect other people as well as yourself.
As our nation now averages some 1,200 deaths a day in the Midwest, home to the most dire surge in the nation, 7 governors, Democrats and Republicans, are sharing the same message in this op-ed: stay home.
It's time, folks. We do not get any do-overs here.
Minnesota is also joining a growing number of states ordering widespread closures. It comes as many continue to mourn this Thanksgiving, including Merlin Gandara.
With COVID, you can't hold them. You can't be near them.
Merlin's mother, Ophelia, was always surrounded by family, but spent her final hours alone.
You go in there thinking you're going to be okay, and at the end of the day, you're not. You're not. You're not. You come out of there in a box. In a box, because that's how we're going to get my mom. In a box.
Tonight, the warning for all Americans: don't trade holidays for funerals.
All right, Miguel joins me now. Miguel, this is going to require a lot of us really to take a deep breath here and think about what could be at stake if we don't put off those family plans.
Yeah, Lester, the CDC says the risk is high because the numbers are through the roof. They've given their guidance, but this is a tough choice for many American families. My mom is a cancer survivor. She's within driving distance, but the risk is just too high. We're both going to play it safe and stay home.
Yeah, a lot of families having that conversation tonight. Miguel, thanks. With so many lives on the line, the concern is how can the vaccine be rushed without delay to those who need it most, as the Trump administration still doesn't coordinate with the Biden folks on one of the biggest healthcare logistical challenges in history. Here's Tom Costello.
While the Trump administration refuses to collaborate with the incoming Biden team on the pandemic response, the nationwide vaccine rollout will take months to coordinate. The FDA tells NBC News its review of applications from two vaccine makers, Pfizer and Moderna, will be expedited but thorough.
I'm promising you, your viewers, the American people, we will not cut corners when it comes to our ultimate assessment of these vaccines.
The Operation Warp Speed commander says the military is already coordinating a supply network through city and state authorities.
We will begin distribution of the vaccine within 24 hours after emergency use authorization is approved.
Pfizer will submit its application tomorrow. One distribution challenge: Pfizer's vaccine must be stored at -94 degrees. Moderna's vaccine doesn't need to be kept so cold, neither does Oxford's vaccine. Oxford has now released early phase 2 trial data showing promising results in both young and older adults. In South Carolina, syringe maker Apogect is prepared to turn out 45 million pre-filled disposable syringes every month.
The advantage here is you have a single dose, as opposed to a 5 or 10 dose vial, which has to be pulled out and calibrated. Every dose is perfect and ready to go.
Tonight, Dr. Fauci says getting the country back to normal will depend on how many Americans are vaccinated and how quickly. The more who are, the more that sense of normalcy may return in the third or fourth quarter of next year. Lester?
All right, Tom Costello.
Distancing and washing hands. The positive news continues on the job market in South Dakota, the state announcing that both initial unemployment claims and continued claims have continued their downward trend. 442 initial claims were filed last week, over 100 less than the previous week. Just over 3,400 continued claims were filed for the week ending on November 7th. That is 450 fewer than reported from the previous week.
As COVID-19 cases surge nationwide, many are facing the tough decision about what to do for the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. The CDC might make that decision easier for you following their latest report. We'll talk about that in 14 minutes. Hello, Tyler.
Hey there, Brian. Cooler temperatures returning for tomorrow.
When you look at Europe, they are viewing schools as an essential service, and they're closing everything else that's necessary in order to protect the ability for children to go to school safely and for teachers and staff in those schools to have the resources they need so they can do that safely. But rather than closing bars, moving restaurants to pick up delivery, canceling some of those indoor activities that we know are at risk, we're reflexively and quickly closing down schools in places where the data aren't showing that's a risk.
Let's go back to what you were saying a moment ago about the federal government, about Congress and its role. What do you think it's most urgent that Congress do? As we know, it's been months since there's been any movement in the Congress on aid around this pandemic. What do you think it's most important that they get done?
Well, there are several things. They need to put in place immediately a moratorium on evictions and mortgage foreclosures. It's estimated that there are tens of millions of people in January who are at risk of becoming homeless, being evicted in the middle of winter, in the middle of a raging pandemic. They need to put money in people's pockets. We saw in the spring how valuable that was for people to meet their essential needs, but also to be able to stay home if they weren't feeling well and thought that they might have COVID. They need to extend unemployment benefits and increase the unemployment benefits so those people who aren't working have the resources they need to protect themselves and their families. They need to ensure that everyone has sick leave and family medical leave. You know, these are things that in many countries are the basics. And they also need to provide protection for small businesses. You know, the PPP program, the payroll protection program, needs to be reinvigorated, and the resources need to be there. And our states desperately need money. You know, unlike the federal government, our states need to balance their budget. And without millions and millions of dollars to states, states are going to have to make decisions as to whether they fully fund Medicaid, whether they fully fund their school systems, whether they fully fund their housing programs. Those programs are desperately needed now, but without federal dollars, state governments will have to make decisions that you never want to see them have to make.
So what would you say to lawmakers who say, well, we put a lot of money, we tried to put a lot of money together, we tried to send it out the door months ago, some of it, a lot of it hasn't been spent yet, we don't want to rush into doing something. What do you say to them?
What I would say to them is look at the number 250,000. 250,000 deaths. And recognize that by the end of the year, we could be talking about 300,000 deaths. And recognize that what you do right now could have a dramatic difference. I am so optimistic based on this vaccine news. If we can push through this winter and do all of these things and get through this winter to the other side, that's when we're going to start to be able to see, hopefully, vaccine at the levels where it could be able to have a real dramatic impact on this pandemic. But if Congress doesn't act now, we're going to be talking about horrific milestones every single month. And that just doesn't have to be, that's not what we want to see from our government.
I hear you saying you're worried about what will happen before that vaccine is available to so many Americans and before we can fully open up. Dr. Rich Besser of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
In the day's other news, the U.S. economy showed new signs of damage from surging COVID-19 infections and restrictions. The Labor Department reported another 742,000 Americans file for unemployment benefits just last week. That was up about 30,000, and it marked the first increase in 5 weeks. President Trump is pulling out more stops in his bid to undo President-elect Joe Biden's victory. Wisconsin today formally ordered a recount in Milwaukee and one other heavily Democratic county, paid for by the Trump campaign. And it was widely reported that Mr. Trump will try to get state lawmakers in states he lost to name new electors. These are the individuals who represent their state in choosing the next president. We'll get details on this after the news summary. Hurricane Iota's death toll has risen to more than 40 across Central America as search teams find more bodies in landslides. The slides were triggered by flooding that overwhelmed whole communities in Honduras and Nicaragua. Rescue efforts are continuing, and the president of Honduras is pledging to help thousands left homeless.
We are continuing with humanitarian work. It is crucial that people do not return to their homes. There are still places at risk. In the meantime, we have to attend to our people with hot food in the shelters. Those who are outside of their homes, in shelters, support will be taken there.
All told, some 230,000 Hondurans and Nicaraguans are living in shelters. Human Rights Watch called today for the U.S.-led security coalition in Afghanistan to investigate soldiers' conduct. That is after an Australian probe concluded that Australian special forces killed at least 39 Afghan prisoners, farmers, and civilians over the years. The report says it's alleged that British and U.S. special forces carried out similar crimes. A badly damaged giant space telescope in Puerto Rico is shutting down. The National Science Foundation says that the iconic Arecibo radio telescope is unstable and beyond repair after years of hurricanes, humidity, and earthquakes. The telescope, with its 1,000-foot wide dish, was built in the 1960s. It has searched for planets, asteroids, and possible life forms. Back in this country, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin is ending several emergency lending programs run by the Federal Reserve during the pandemic. They used Treasury funds to back the corporate bond and municipal debt markets, among other things. The Fed says that the economy still needs that support, but Mnuchin said today that Congress intended the programs to stop at year's end. And on Wall Street, stocks managed a modest advance. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 44 points to close at 29,483. The Nasdaq rose 103 points, and the S&P 500 added 14.
Let's go.
The Ninja Foodie Power Pitcher. Rethink what a blender can do.
Sunday morning in Pierre, Rapid City, really no shot of rainfall. The only major difference is going to come either on the thermometer.
Well, first of all, I think that Trump seems to have taken the lesson from business where a lawsuit can, cause your enemy or your opponent a little bit of harm and cost them money and credibility and draw things out. He doesn't seem to realize that, or he does realize maybe, but throwing, sand in the machinery of government is really causing a lot of harm right now to both the country and the Republican brand. What I think Trump is trying to do is he's trying to freeze the field, keep his supporters in place, and maintain the base for the 2022 midterms and beyond. But what he's doing is destructive, and he really needs to stop for the good of the country. You can't relive or replay the fourth quarter once it's over. You've got to move on and think about the next game or the next season or whatever. And I really urge, other Republicans. It's time to be a Mitt Romney Republican right now and focus on being gracious, being calm, and where the country needs to go. I think that's leadership. I think that's presidential leadership. And I call on Donald Trump to do that, to do it now, to do it yesterday.
Gloria, Mitt Romney, of course, has been on a pretty lonely island when it comes to behaving that way with what Dan says, with the great graciousness. Gloria, to Dan's point, does the president realize his actions could backfire on him, or really does he have some sort of a plan here where he thinks 70 million people are going to stay with him? He's going to be running some sort of, I don't know, like government in exile.
I don't know. He doesn't seem to have a plan, and when I talk to my sources and ask them, have you told him that this is hurting democracy? Have you told them that this isn't good for the Republican Party? Have you told them that this is actually anti-democratic? And the answer is, it doesn't matter what you say, he doesn't see it. So what he, and that, that is a quote, he doesn't see how bad the aftermath of all of this could be, not only for him personally, of course, but for the country. But that is not his concern right now. His concern is that he needs to find a way to back out, because he's going to lose, without looking like a loser, which he thinks is the worst thing in the world. And so he's, I guess, trying to work this through, or not, because in the end, I don't expect him to concede. I don't expect him to be gracious. I think in one way or another, he'll walk out the back door and drop the mic somewhere, but to an adoring crowd, perhaps. But he just doesn't see what this is doing to the country because he can't see beyond himself.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate your time. Dan?
Ridiculous.
You move freely. There was a plan from a centralized place to execute these various acts of voter fraud, specifically focused on big cities.
Even with disinformation emanating from the very top, the process marches on. Michigan has now certified its statewide results. A recount in Georgia is coming to an end, with Biden still winning. And as more battleground states certify tallies ahead of a December 8th deadline, President Trump's pathways to challenging votes are being closed off, one by one. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Sy.
For more on the Trump campaign's election maneuverings, we turn to our White House correspondent, Yamiche Alcindor. She's in Wilmington, Delaware tonight. Amy, it's so nice to see you. Help us explain, what is the political strategy behind the Trump campaign's efforts to keep fighting these fights in these different states?
Well, President Trump is continuing to ratchet up his campaign to unjustifiably have the election overturned in his favor by getting personally involved in a way we have not seen any American president do in an election. And the Trump campaign is continuing to file lawsuit after lawsuit without any evidence of their claims of voter fraud. And most of that is coming through the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Now, the president did something that was very, very remarkable. He called 2 county officials in Michigan, in Wayne County, which includes Detroit, and he essentially talked to them about the election. Now, these officials were people who did not at first want to certify the votes. They then went ahead and voted to certify them. But after talking to President Trump, they then decided they wanted to rescind their votes to certify. Now, state officials say that there is no legal avenue to do that. But critics of the president say that this is dangerous behavior for him to actually be calling people personally as the president of the United States. Also, the president has invited the top 2 Republican elected officials in Michigan. They have a Republican-controlled state legislature to the White House. Critics of the president say that's going to be, again, a bid for him to try to overturn a state where President-elect Joe Biden is leading him by 150,000 votes. Now, I put the question to President-elect Biden today: is this all of this behavior from the president? Is it making you change your legal strategy? Is it making you alarmed? He said that he is not changing his legal strategy at this time, but that the president is being irresponsible and possibly being the most irresponsible president in U.S. history.
Yamiche, as you mentioned, they've had some legal setbacks, the Trump campaign, but is this perhaps working in the court of public opinion? I mean, are these various fights actually changing people's minds?
Well, despite President Trump not having any evidence of his claims of voter fraud, it is absolutely having an impact on the American electorate, in particular Trump supporters. Now, yesterday, Monmouth University released a poll, and it showed that 77% of Trump supporters believe that Joe Biden is the president-elect due to fraud, and only 11% believe that the election was actually fair and square. Now, that's problematic because President-elect Joe Biden will have to govern in America where millions and millions of Americans believe the president's unfounded claims. And the President Trump, he could take that same influence and have these voters continuing to believe that the election was rigged and somehow stolen from him, and he could continue to fundraise, continue to have influence in the Republican Party. So it's definitely a place where we should watch that space.
God, those poll numbers are really incredible. Yamiche Sindor from Wilmington, Delaware, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks.
For more on the president's moves, we turn again to Nate Persily. He is at Stanford University Law School, and he is the co-founder of the Healthy Elections Project. Nate, great to see you again. There are so many pots cooking on the stove here, legal pots all over the country. I wonder if you could help us figure some of these things out. Let's talk about the lawsuits first. By my count, the Trump campaign has filed maybe 24 different kinds of lawsuits. Will you remind us, what are those suits, what have they been suing, and how have they been received?
Well, there's been 31 decisions at this point, actually, or withdrawals of lawsuits, and they've lost 30 of them. And these lawsuits span the gamut from questioning signature verification in Nevada to accusing different election officials in Pennsylvania of applying different standards to Democrats and Republicans, as well as a host of other procedural objections about, for example, not enough observers getting close enough to observe the ballot counting process. And so far, the courts have been quite resilient, and they've been turning away these lawsuits, and the Trump campaign has been losing them. But there's still several that are in the pipeline, 5 or 6 that are sort of the more major cases, many in Pennsylvania. And in addition to those cases, we have recount processes in Georgia and in Wisconsin that themselves might lead to lawsuits.
The thing I find so interesting is that we heard again in Stephanie Tsai's report that Rudy Giuliani is still alleging this broader conspiracy, that there was this sort of cadre of people in a central place plotting this voter fraud. And yet, as you're describing, when you look at the actual cases, the cases don't seem to be alleging any part of that grand conspiracy.
Well, that's right, because it can't be proven. So you can't just say sort of the man behind the curtain is responsible for all of these voting problems and not know who that man might be. And so there's been a kind of blunderbuss approach to these accusations. They include, accusations about the voting machine manufacturers, accusations about local election officials or even people in polling places. And then you have accusations against the state officials, some of whom are Republican and some of whom are Democrat. So it's not as if it's just going after some kind of conspiracy on the part of the Biden campaign. It's going after the entire election infrastructure in some respects, saying that there was a multi-state effort in order to sort of shift votes to Biden.
You mentioned before that there were recounts that are going on. Can you remind us where those are happening and whose votes are being counted?
So right now we have a full-on recount that's happening in Georgia, and that should conclude in the next few days. And those are all the ballots that were cast in Georgia. It's actually technically what we call an election audit, but they're going to be recounting all the ballots. And just to prepare your viewers, there will be a difference in the numbers that are recounted than the ones that were the final totals. There always are in these kinds of recounts. But they won't be in the thousands that would be needed to flip the result. In Wisconsin, we have a different procedure that's about to unfold, where the Trump campaign has paid $3 million to have recounts in Dane and Milwaukee counties. Dane is where the capital Madison is. And so they will do some recounts there to see whether there's any sort of significant errors between the votes that were cast on Election Day and in the mail.
Training. Only
certificates of ascertainment are then issued as a ministerial duty, just like what was explained in Wayne County, and then those electors will be seated.
And Mr. Kinlock, I'm going to give you the final word on this. Do you view this as an attack on black voters, to be blunt, in the city of Detroit?
Oh, without a doubt. We had a board of canvass meeting on Tuesday, and the chair of the county, chair of our board of canvassers, was willing to entertain or ask whether or not we were willing to consider a certification that did not include the city of Detroit. I mean, this is basically what all these lawsuits have been about. It's been about bringing disparage about among the votes in the city of Detroit. You had the chair as well as the other Republican member on the Board of Canvassers participating in challenging ballots at the absentee county board in the city of Detroit. They weren't out in Livonia. They weren't in Grosse Pointe. They were right there in the city of Detroit challenging ballots, and then brought that insanity into our certification process. This is all about disenfranchising the black votes in the city of Detroit, and that is unacceptable, and we here in Michigan will not stand for that.
Yeah, if you just take the votes in Milwaukee and Detroit out, Trump wins one vote. So just take all the black people out. That's the easiest way for Trump to win. It's madness. Jonathan Kinlock and Jacobs, thank you both for being there and standing up for democracy. Thank you both. And up next, a member of President-elect Biden's COVID task force joins me on the escalating virus catastrophe and the toll that it's taking on America's healthcare professionals like this one.
The emotional and the physical stress, it's exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. I don't know how.
A son with bruises, a mother with a black eye.
A brutal murder.
You gonna charge?
Doing the work of making sure jobs come back. But I was part of a larger network of folks. What I was able to do over the last decade was build infrastructure, raise resources, and scale the investment. And I've been a relentless cheerleader about the possibilities of Georgia. So I am happy to take credit for pulling attention to Georgia, but I want to make certain that we understand this was work done by many organizations and many people who would never get the credit because they could never get the resources to be seen and be heard. And I also want to point out that the work that we did in Georgia also happened around the country, that if you were in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, where voter suppression harmed your ability to vote in 2016 or 2018, there were voter protection folks on the ground in those states across the country, but particularly in those states who reversed the attempts to suppress the right to vote and made certain that voters could be heard. Here in Georgia, it's been about ending voter suppression, but also engaging new voters, and I am proud to be a part of making that a reality in Georgia in 2020.
Yeah, and I know you talk about your team, but obviously you have been, very clearly credited by so many. When you lost the governor's race, and that was in 2018, you didn't concede formally, and now you've got Republicans, right? Lindsey Graham, bringing him up again, he's pointing to that and saying that there's a double standard being applied today, given that and President Trump's failure to concede. what is it you think that is so important for people to understand about what you did and why it is different from what President Trump is doing now?
In 2018, tens of thousands of Georgia voters were denied the right to cast ballots, to have those ballots counted. They were pushed out of the electorate through no fault of their own and in defiance of their citizenship in the United States and in the state of Georgia. What I said on the night that I ended my campaign was, number one, I ended the campaign. I said that I acknowledged the legal sufficiency of the election, but I challenged the system that permitted voters to lose their right to vote. That is something we should all decry and something we should all fight against. In contrast, Donald Trump is decrying the system that didn't allow him to cheat, a system that permitted every voter who tried to be heard, by and large, to be allowed and included in the process. He is refusing to acknowledge that the system did what it was supposed to do. Now, if he dislikes the system, I'd say use the court system if you want to challenge it, but you have to tell the truth and you have to provide evidence. We provided not only sufficient evidence to get to a federal court and to see market changes made in the state of Georgia, but we had sufficient evidence to make an entire documentary about it. And so I would argue that the absence of evidence is proof that there is no analogous situation between what I did in 2018 and what Donald Trump is doing today.
All right, well, Stacey Abrams, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and next, Trump now using the power of his office to try to flip Michigan.
It's only averaging between around 5 and 10 miles an hour for many of us. In the Pierre area, it is just a little bit stronger for now, upwards of 15 miles an hour. Here are your weather headlines for tonight. Those clouds will be clearing out. This leads us into Friday, where more sunshine is on the way, along with cooler weather. Precipitation chances do return for this week, and it is looking to be light as well, but some of us could see some light snow mixing in as well. We'll talk about that coming up in just a few minutes, Beth.
Thank you, Tyler. Police are investigating a shooting that left one man hospitalized. The shooting happened near 57th Street and Cliff Avenue earlier this afternoon. Police say the victim met the suspect at a Walgreens in the area of Walgreens. At some point, the victim was shot, with the suspect leaving the scene. According to officers, the victim was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Police say there is no danger to the public at this time. They do ask, though, that if you have any information, to contact Crime Stoppers with your information.
South Dakota officials reporting 31 new COVID-19 related deaths. As of today, officials have reported 280 deaths since the beginning of this month. The state also announcing 1,071 additional cases earlier today, with nearly 2,400 new recoveries. With those new recoveries, the active case count dropped to under 18,000. Officials say nearly 2,300 people were tested, with nearly 47% of those individuals coming back positive.
Minnesota has set another single-day high in reported COVID-19 deaths. Officials announced 72 virus-related deaths. The previous high was set yesterday with 67. The state announced 7,878 new cases. Minnesota's positivity rate has now risen to 6.9%. Meanwhile, in Iowa, nearly 4,200 new COVID-19 cases were discovered over the past day, along with nearly 1,500 new recoveries. Officials reported 38 new COVID-19 deaths, related deaths. The state's active case count sits at 83,782. A new lawsuit alleges that plant managers for one of the country's largest meat companies placed bets on how many employees would contract coronavirus. The lawsuit, filed for the estate of workers who died while working for Tyson Foods in Waterloo, says the plant manager at Tyson's Waterloo facility organized a winner-take-all pool for supervisors and managers to wager how many workers would test positive. Following the lawsuit, Tyson has suspended top officials at the plant and launched an investigation into the allegations. The Waterloo plant is the largest processing facility in the company and employs around 2,800 people.
With Thanksgiving 1 week from today, U.S. doctors, nurses, and hospital officials are pleading with Americans to scale back holiday gatherings as COVID cases and deaths skyrocket. As Wynn Woolfolk reports, the CDC even recommending people not travel for the holiday this year. That story, new here at 6:30.
With infection rates soaring, the nationwide death toll passing 250,000, and many hospitals reaching capacity, the second COVID wave proving worse than the first.
We're alarmed.
with the exponential increase in cases and hospitalizations and deaths.
That alarm prompting the CDC to recommend Americans not travel during this Thanksgiving holiday.
This is a serious point in time in the pandemic, and that we need to be all doubling down on the things that we know work for slowing the spread of COVID-19.
In an open letter to the American people, 3 organizations representing healthcare workers, quote, strongly urge everyone throughout our country to celebrate responsibly in a scaled-back fashion that limits the virus's spread. Despite pandemic fatigue and Thanksgiving 1 week away, no time to let our guard down. But in Utah, the sound of gratitude. This patient, still intubated and unable to speak, played the violin to show appreciation for all of those who've taken care of him. Wendy Wolfolk, NBC News.